No one at the United Nations expected what was about to happen that day. It was supposed to be a routine assembly, another session filled with speeches, promises, and polite applause. But then, a young Filipino speaker walked up to the podium, holding nothing but a small piece of paper and a heart full of fire. What happened next left world leaders in complete silence. They called her Amira Santos, a 27-year-old woman from the Philippines who had lived through typhoons, poverty, and injustice. She wasn't a politician. She wasn't a diplomat. She wasn't even supposed to be on that stage. She was there by invitation, one that came after a viral video of her addressing her local community about climate injustice reached millions around the world. And somehow, that video caught the attention of the UN. When Amira stepped up to the microphone, she didn't look nervous. She looked calm, almost too calm for someone about to speak in front of the most powerful people on earth. Delegates whispered. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters were ready to write her off as another emotional activist. But then, she spoke her first sentence. "Your Excellencies," she said softly, "I stand before you, not as a representative of power, but as a survivor of your decisions." The entire hall went still. It wasn't the kind of opening they expected. No greetings, no formalities, just truth. She told them about her village in Samar, how floods destroyed her home 3 times before she turned 16. She talked about her father, a fisherman who could no longer catch fish because the waters were poisoned by industrial waste. She talked about her little brother who died from a preventable illness, because in their town, hospitals were too far and medicine too expensive. But then, she said something that no one saw coming. "You say you are here to build peace," she continued, her voice steady. "But peace cannot exist where hunger does. You talk about equality, yet your systems are built to keep the poor at the bottom. You promise help, but you send loans that choke us instead." There was a murmur in the hall. Some delegates looked away. Some leaned forward. Cameras caught the look on their faces, surprise, discomfort, even shame. But Amira didn't stop. She took a deep breath and pressed on. "I am from a country that gives the world its workers, its nurses, its helpers. We clean your homes, we care for your children, we build your cities. And yet, when we cry for justice, you tell us to wait. How long do we have to wait?" The hall erupted, not in applause, but in stunned silence. No one had ever spoken to the UN like that before. It wasn't just a speech. It was a mirror held up to the world. Can you imagine the courage it takes to stand before world leaders and tell them they are the problem? Would you have done the same if you were in her place? Drop your answer in the comment section below. I'd really love to know what you think. Back to the speech. Amira then took a step closer to the microphone. "You make resolutions," she said. "But we, the people, live with the consequences. You hold conferences in air-conditioned halls, while my people hold funerals under the rain." Her words hit like thunder. The camera panned to the faces of presidents, ambassadors, and ministers. Some were nodding slowly. Others avoided eye contact. Even the Secretary General looked uneasy. But what truly shocked everyone was what she did next. She raised a clear glass jar filled with muddy water. "This," she said, holding it up high, "is what our children drink." Gasps echoed across the hall. It was raw. It was real. She had brought the truth right into their perfect world of suits and speeches. Then she asked the question that no one dared to answer. "How can you call yourselves leaders if you are not leading us to life?" That line spread like wildfire across social media. Within minutes, clips of her speech flooded Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. Hashtags with her name began trending. News anchors interrupted their programs just to replay her words. The entire world was talking about the Filipino speaker who made the UN go silent. But inside that hall, the tension was rising. Some delegates clapped. Others didn't. A few even walked out. And yet, Amira stayed calm. She smiled faintly, as if she had expected it all. "You can leave," she said softly to those walking away. "But the storms won't." Imagine that moment. A young woman from a small island nation standing firm, while world leaders couldn't even bear to listen. Would you have kept speaking if people started walking out? Or would you have stopped? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Keep going or walk away. By this time, millions were already tuning in to the live stream. Amira's name was everywhere. Journalists called her the voice of the drowned. Others called her the UN disruptor. But she didn't care about the titles. She wasn't there for fame. She was there because her people were dying while the world debated policies. Then, she did something that made even the translators pause in disbelief. She switched languages, from English to Tagalog. Her voice softened, but her message grew stronger. Ang Totu, she said, Ang mundo ay hindi kalang sa yaman, kalang ito sa katarungan. The truth is, the world is not lacking in wealth, it is lacking in justice. It was so unexpected that the interpreters froze for a few seconds before catching up. The hall was still. The world listened. For the first time, the United Nations, a place known for political language and polished diplomacy, heard the rhythm of a Filipino heart beating through its walls. Then Amira looked directly at the global leaders in the front row and said, "If you want to help us, stop helping us the way you always have." There was confusion. What did she mean? She explained, "Stop sending aid that disappears into bureaucracy. Stop giving us loans with strings that choke us. Stop promising change while you profit from our pain. What we need is not your sympathy. What we need is your honesty." Those words echoed like thunder. She wasn't begging. She wasn't thanking. She was challenging. And the world had never seen anything like it. People online started sharing her quotes. Some cried. Others got angry. A few world leaders called her words reckless. But to many ordinary people, she had said what they'd been wanting to say for decades. And yet, she wasn't finished. She leaned forward again and whispered something that made the entire hall lean in too. "You know what's strange?" she said. "When a country like mine is in pain, we always hear the same phrase from the global community. We are deeply concerned. But concern doesn't rebuild homes. Concern doesn't feed a child. Concern doesn't stop a typhoon. So I ask you today, when will concern turn into courage?" That line hit harder than any political statement. It was the kind of truth no one could spin or soften. Before continuing, let's pause for a second. What do you think she meant when she said, "Concern doesn't stop a typhoon"? Do you agree that global sympathy often replaces real action? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if this story has moved you even a little, please hit that like button. It really helps share stories like this with more people. Now, here's where things took an unexpected turn. After the speech, as Amira began to walk away from the podium, one delegate from a powerful Western nation stood up and said, "Miss Santos, do you propose we stop helping entirely? What would your country do without our aid?" There was a murmur in the crowd. Everyone turned back toward her. Cameras swung around. She turned too, her expression calm but firm. And then, she gave an answer that would go down in history. "No," she said, "I'm asking you to start helping for real. If you want to help, stand with us, not above us. Listen before you lecture. Partner with us, not profit from us." It was a masterclass in dignity. The room went quiet again, not out of shock this time, but out of respect. Even the delegate who had challenged her sat down without a word. After she left the podium, people stood up one by one and started clapping. It wasn't a planned standing ovation. It was spontaneous, raw, and emotional. For a moment, the divisions between rich and poor nations blurred. The sound of applause filled the hall like a wave of hope. But outside the UN, a storm was brewing. Political analysts started debating her words. Governments issued statements. Some praised her courage, others called her speech dangerous populism. But no one could ignore it. The next day, newspapers across the world ran headlines like "The Filipino Who Shook the UN" and "Amira Santos, the speech that changed everything." And yet, behind all the fame, Amira remained grounded. She returned to her community, helped rebuild schools, and continued speaking, not at grand conferences, but in villages where children listened under mango trees. Still, the ripples of her speech continued to spread. Within weeks, several international aid agencies began reviewing their policies. A few governments proposed reforms in how they delivered assistance to developing nations. For the first time in decades, it seemed like someone had managed to pierce the thick armor of global politics. But Amira didn't celebrate. She knew something the rest of the world hadn't realized yet, something she had discovered in the aftermath of her speech. And when she finally revealed it, it stunned everyone all over again. A week after the world-changing speech, Amira Santos returned home to the Philippines. The cameras were gone. The lights of the UN hall had faded. But deep inside her, something had changed, and so had the world. She didn't go home to celebrate. She went home to listen. In her small coastal town, people gathered around her like she was a hero. Children followed her everywhere. Old fishermen thanked her with tears in their eyes. But she wasn't smiling. Not really. Because while the world praised her courage, she had seen something behind the scenes that no one else had. Something that bothered her more than anything. Just hours after her speech, she had been invited to a private discussion with several high-ranking officials. It sounded like an honor, but it wasn't what she expected. Inside the meeting room, there were no cameras, no reporters, just politicians and corporate representatives. One man spoke first. "Miss Santos," he said politely, "your speech was powerful. But you must understand, change takes time. The world economy is complex. We cannot simply shift policies overnight." Another added, "Perhaps we could work on a project together. We'd like to offer funding for your community in exchange for a partnership with our company." That was the moment Amira realized something. Her message, the cry for justice, was already being packaged and marketed. They wanted to use her voice as a brand, to make her part of the same system she had just criticized. She quietly thanked them, stood up, and left the room without shaking hands. Outside in the hallway, she leaned against a wall and whispered to herself, "They still don't understand." When she told this story to her village, everyone was shocked. "So what will you do now?" a woman asked her. Amira looked at the horizon and said, "If they won't change from the top, we'll start from the bottom." That one sentence became her mission. She began traveling across the Philippines, meeting farmers, teachers, fishermen, and young activists. She taught them how to organize, how to speak, and how to demand accountability from their own leaders. The movement grew faster than anyone expected. Within months, there were thousands of volunteers calling themselves Project Luentien, the Green Project. Their goal was simple: rebuild communities sustainably without waiting for international aid. They started planting mangroves, building water filters, and creating solar cooperatives. And every time they succeeded, Amira reminded them, "We are proving that hope doesn't need permission." But her growing influence didn't go unnoticed. Powerful people began to feel threatened. One morning, Amira received an anonymous letter slipped under her door. It said, "Stay quiet, or you will regret it." She showed it to her closest friend, an environmental lawyer named Carlo, who warned her to be careful. "You've become too visible," he said. "They don't want a voice that can't be controlled." Amira just smiled. "Then they'll have to learn to listen." A few weeks later, she received an invitation, this time from the UN itself. They wanted her to return and join a global advisory council on climate action. It sounded like progress, but she hesitated. Should she go back to the same system that tried to silence her? What would you have done if you were in her place? Would you go back to the UN to influence it from the inside, or stay with the people and build change from the ground up? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop your answer in the comment section below. After days of thinking, Amira decided to go. But this time, she went prepared. When she entered the UN building again, the atmosphere was completely different. The people who once dismissed her now treated her like a celebrity. Cameras flashed. Journalists followed her down the hallway. But she wasn't interested in attention. She wanted accountability. During one closed-door session, she asked the question no one else dared to ask. "Can anyone in this room tell me where last year's climate aid actually went?" The room went quiet. Papers shuffled. No one answered. She pressed again, this time louder. "You say billions were spent. Then show us the results. Where are the homes rebuilt? Where are the schools promised? Where is the clean water?" Finally, one delegate muttered, "These things take time." Amira looked straight at him and said, "My people don't have time." That confrontation leaked to the media, sparking massive public outrage. Suddenly, citizens around the world began demanding transparency in how international aid was used. Some agencies panicked. Others tried to control the narrative by painting Amira as too emotional or unrealistic. But it didn't work. People had seen through the illusion. And then, the shocking truth came out. An investigative journalist released a report revealing that millions of dollars meant for disaster recovery in Southeast Asia had been misused by private contractors tied to government officials. It was a global scandal. Documents showed that some of the funds had been diverted to luxury projects, resorts, conference centers, even private jets. Amira was devastated, but not surprised. "This is why we never rise," she said. "Because those who hold the rope keep pulling it upward, never downward." The revelations shook the UN to its core. Several officials were forced to resign. Aid programs were frozen for review. The public demanded reforms. It was the biggest accountability crisis the organization had faced in years, and it had all started with one Filipino speaker who refused to stay silent. Yet even in the chaos, Amira kept her focus on the people. When reporters asked her if she felt proud, she simply said, "The truth is not a trophy. It's a responsibility." But something else was coming, something that would test her like never before. Months later, another powerful typhoon hit the Philippines. Stronger than any before it. Entire towns were washed away. Communications went down. The international community once again issued statements of concern. But this time, Amira didn't wait for them. Using the network she had built through Project Luntien, she organized one of the largest community-led relief operations in the country's history. Volunteers from across Asia joined. Boats carried food to remote islands. Engineers built emergency shelters from bamboo and scrap metal. The world watched in awe as ordinary people rebuilt what the storms had destroyed, faster than any government agency. When asked how they did it, one volunteer said, "Because Amira taught us not to wait for saviors." That phrase became a movement on its own. #No more saviors. It spread across continents, from Africa to Latin America, uniting young people who were tired of waiting for change to come from above. Even schools began teaching her speech in their curriculum. But behind the inspiration was exhaustion. Amira hadn't slept properly in weeks. She was constantly moving from one disaster area to another. One night, as she sat by the sea, she looked out at the dark water and whispered, "I hope they understand this isn't about me." That same night, her friend Carlo joined her. "They do," he said softly, "but they needed someone to remind them." She smiled. Then maybe it was worth it. The next morning, she received a message from the UN Secretary General requesting a video call. When she answered, his first word surprised her. "Miss Santos," he said, "we've heard your call. The UN is creating a new framework for direct community funding, bypassing political middlemen. We want your guidance in building it." Amira was silent for a few seconds. Then she nodded. "I'll help," she said, "but only if you promise that the people will have a seat at the table, not just a voice." He smiled and replied, "Then consider it done." And just like that, the system she once challenged began to change from within. Months later, she returned to the same UN podium where everything had started. This time, the hall was packed, not with suspicion, but with anticipation. Everyone wanted to hear what she would say. She began softly, "The first time I stood here, I spoke as a survivor. Today, I stand as a believer, not in governments or corporations, but in people." She looked around the room, then continued, "You see, power was never meant to belong to a few. It belongs to those who wake up every day and refuse to give up. The farmers who plant after floods. The mothers who rebuild with bare hands. The children who study by candlelight. They are the leaders the world has been waiting for." The audience listened in complete silence. She ended her speech with one final line that would be remembered for generations. "Don't call us the future. We are the present." and the present is demanding to be heard. Thunderous applause filled the hall. Delegates stood. Some even cried. Cameras flashed once more, but this time it wasn't about spectacle. It was about hope. As she walked off the stage, one journalist asked her, "Do you think you've changed the world?" Amira paused, turned around, and said, "No. The world changed the moment it started listening." The documentary closes with scenes of rebuilding. Farmers planting trees, children drinking clean water, communities standing stronger than before. Over it all, her voice echoes. The storms will keep coming. The difference is, we're no longer waiting for someone else to save us. So here's a question for you. Do you think one voice can truly change the world, or does real change only happen when we all rise together? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. And if this story inspired you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice, one brave heart, to remind the world to listen.